I am open the room. Let's wait a few minutes. We already have Sarah with us, Joe, Ramon, Michael. Hello, everyone. We were just waiting a few minutes to start our meetup. Okay. So if you want to grab coffee or maybe water, we still have some time. I can see a lot of community members here. I'm very glad to to see you guys. And I'd love to know you better actually. So you can use the chat to send us your name, company, and city if you like it. You can use Sarah from Canada, always here. Thanks, Sarah. How is the little cat, Sarah? Sarah has like new babies,
Oh,
and yeah, they are beautiful. She's taking
oh,
care of them.
that's
Nice.
wonderful.
You have to post in the community. Oh, now I'm actually very jealous of the kittens. Hi, Ramon from Panama. For those who don't know me, I'm Juliana. I'm Curitiba, and I'm the community manager at Pipefi. And I live now in Curitiba, south of Brazil. And no, Curitiba is not sunny, as everyone thought. Brazilian city are it's freezing this week, actually. Kaina, you have to endorse me in this one.
Yes, of course. I'm in São Paulo, Ju, but I know Curitiba is a freeze
Yeah,
place, so maybe Curitiba is freezing now.
nice. Okay, more people are joining us. 1 minute, and then we can start. Bridget, Chris, welcome. Dennis as well. Eduardo Cano is here. We have a Brazilian here with us. Eduardo Cano, always super engaged with the community. Thanks, Edu. I guess Chris is asking who is from Panama. I guess is Ramon. Ramon, I guess this is the way that I have to pronounce, right? Yeah. So I believe we can start. Okay. So thanks for being here today for our monthly event. It's always a great pleasure to run our community meetups for our members and clients. And time flies because this month in June, Pipefi community is celebrating 1 year. And I want to say thank you to everyone who participates and engages with us and even help us to build our unique community, right? So the best way to celebrate is bring more exclusive content for you. And today our global meetup is about privacy law. We invited our security team and Sumita, who kindly accepted our invitation to give us an overview of the topic and answer questions you may have. Okay, so thank you again, Kaina and Sumita, for being here. And as you already know, you can send the questions and comments on the chat and also use our Q&A session at the bottom to send us your questions, okay? So enjoy the event. Sumita, the stage is yours. I will just change the presentation and you can start.
Wonderful. Well, first off, it's a pleasure and it's a privilege to be participating. I'm just so honored to be here. So thank you. Thank you, Juliana, for organizing, for just being so wonderful through this. I appreciate you. And Mr. Gomez, I am super excited to be partnering with you today to provide, just some thoughts and some general overview on GDPR. And so with that, I think we'll just go ahead and dive in with the next slide. So, my objectives for this talk today is to really give kind of a high level overview of the most essential components of GDPR. So starting with just the basics, what is GDPR? What's the scope? What are some of the key terms that we tend to hear or discuss over and over again in the context of the law? Some data protection principles, touch on data security, Mr. Gomez, of course, that's his expertise. So I am a lay person at best on that. So I'll just speak very high level from the law point of view. Processing personal data, privacy rights, and then Privacy Shield. I added that because there's been some significant developments over the last few months in Privacy Shield, and that is impacting several companies at the moment. So I thought it'd be nice to kind of touch on that, at least give some overviews. So with that, the next slide, what is GDPR? And I think, you know, people have heard enough about GDPR. It's pretty familiar with folks, but just as, again, an overview, it provides a framework for data privacy laws across the EU member countries. Now, each member country can modify GDPR in ways that it deems appropriate. So that's why you'll see some nuances between the different EU countries. So for example, Germany, they have, you know, adapted the GDPR for what they think works best for them. And so it kind of isn't a one size fits all when we're looking at GDPR across the entire EU spectrum. But at the core of it, at the heart of it, is data protection and privacy rights to individuals. And it regulates how businesses handle personal data of individuals. And given the gravity and the seriousness of handling personal data, there are some potential for very large fines, as well as reputational damage if unfortunately there's a data breach and a company is found to be in violation of GDPR. The next slide. So what is the scope of GDPR? And this is something that, again, I think a lot of folks are familiar with it, but it's kind of nice to reiterate that it applies, you know, if there's any processing of personal data of an EU citizen or resident, or if you're an entity that offer goods or services to EU citizens or residents, GDPR will apply, even if your entity is not located in the EU per se. The fines, especially with the last update to the law, it can be rather severe. So it's looking at a maximum of 20 million euro, 4% of global revenue, whichever is higher. There's also, you know, data subjects have the right to seek compensation for damages as well. Now, obviously that is a maximum penalty, you know, depending on if there is a breach and what the facts are and what's involved. You know, there are ways to negotiate that, but, you know, that is definitely at the top end and something to be considerate of, and it is serious. In addition, you know, there's reputational harm, right? If there's a breach, even if the penalties in and of themselves is not so severe, there's what I call the front page test, and that can be rather damaging if a company is found to be in breach. And then lastly, for many companies, you have enterprise customers, and depending on what the terms are with those enterprise customers, there may be exposure, you know, if there's a data breach under those particular contracts, so there's risk associated there. So all in all, again, it just behooves companies to really pay attention to GDPR and the requirements because the regulatory authorities and customers pay attention to this. Next slide. So what are some of the key terms and definitions that we associate with the GDPR? So the first is personal data, and that means, you know, any information that relates to an individual who can be directly or indirectly identified. So it would include some of the obvious data points, name, email address, but it would also encompass things like location information, web cookies, biometric data. So the GDPR has a very broad swath of what it includes in the definition of personal data. Now, there are nuances depending on whether you're, say, under GDPR versus, say, the CCPA for California, but generally the GDPR is sort of the standard to look to as far as these definitions. The next term that people hear a lot of is data processing. And again, it's a very broad term. So it's any action performed on personal data, whether automated or manual. So this would include collecting, recording, organizing, storing, using personal data. So essentially, it encompasses pretty much any action that's taken on personal data. The other key term that we hear a lot of in GDPR is the data subject. And as I'm sure everyone can surmise, that means the person whose data is processed. Data controller and data processor. So especially between companies on the B2B side, this can be a very important issue to identify and to shore up and to make sure that there's clarity around. So the data controller is the entity which decides why and how personal data will be processed. And as you can expect, there is liability for data controllers. There's liability for data processors as well, but the data controller really is that entity that will determine, the course of personal data processing. Data processor, as the name implies, is the third party that processes the personal data on behalf of the data controller. And there are agreements and provisions that are regulated under the GDPR, depending on who's the data controller and who's the data processor, that we include in our enterprise or B2B contracts, again, to be compliant with GDPR regulations and to be very clear what the data is, what the types of data is involved, what are the instructions for processing, what's the purpose, et cetera, so that contractually parties can be compliant with GDPR. Next slide. And I'm also going to do a time check so I don't lie and go over. I better speed this up a little bit. Data protection principles. So this is at the heart of GDPR, and the regulations really, revolve around these very basic tenets. So lawfulness, fairness, transparency of the personal data processing, having a limitation on the purpose for why you're collecting the personal data and what actions you're taking on it. Data minimization. So again, only the data that's absolutely necessary for the purpose of the collection. There's accuracy, so keeping the personal data accurate and up to date. Storage limitation, which ties into the principles of data minimization, where you're only storing personally identifying data for as long as necessary for the specified purpose. Integrity and confidentiality. Processing must be done in a way that ensures appropriate security, integrity, and confidentiality, such as using encryption. And lastly, accountability. The data controller is responsible for demonstrating GDPR compliance with these foregoing principles. So what does that mean? So some examples include designating data protection responsibilities to various teams, maintaining detailed documentation of the data that's being collected, how it's being collected, where it's stored, which employee is responsible for it, et cetera. Training, implementing, of course, technical and organizational security measures, data processing agreements with third parties who process the data for you, and depending on the organization, even perhaps designating a data protection officer. The next slide. So data security, and as you can imagine, this is at the heart of pretty much every contract negotiation on the B2B side, and it also, of course, plays into direct to consumer. But the law requires to handle data securely by implementing what's called appropriate technical and organizational measures. So technical measures, as you can imagine, they're going to vary, by the type of entity. But one example is, as I've noted here, requiring a two-factor authentication on accounts storing personal data. And I see Mr. Gomez nodding his head. So of course, he is going to be the expert to talk the specifics around that. As far as organizational measures are concerned, and we kind of touched on this with the last slide, think about things such as employee training, written policies, limiting access to personal data to only those who have a need to know. Data breach. Now, unfortunately, we all hope for the best, but we know that sometimes bad things happen, even with the best of intentions. And as companies, we can strive to create data security measures that are designed to prevent a data breach, but of course, there's never any guarantee. And if there is a data breach, the GDPR has some very specific definitions and requirements and obligations depending on what the incident involves. But data breach, as I have here, is defined very specifically under GDPR as the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, et cetera, to personal data. And unlike in the US, an incident could qualify as a data breach under GDPR without necessarily triggering notification requirements to individuals or regulatory body. There are several rules around notification requirements, timing, notice, form, content, et cetera. I'm not going to, that in and of itself, just data security could be an entire hour presentation, but just giving very, very high level. The threshold that we look at when we, and I speak between legal and security, we work very, very closely in these matters. And so when our security team, kind of raises the flag that there might be an incident, generally the investigation that we're conducting and we're trying to determine is, did the incident, could it result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subject? And that's sort of the benchmark that we apply in the analysis to determine, do we have some notification requirements that might flow through from the incident? And unfortunately, if we do determine that there is a likely result to some sort of high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons, then that triggers notification requirements to regulatory agency as well as to the individual data subjects. And this is where the data controller, data processor relationship between the companies really becomes very critical at the outset when we're dealing with the contract phase, because typically as the data controller, you're going to want to be the one deciding, did the incident rise to the level of a data breach that requires notification? And if so, as a data controller, you would have that responsibility and the discretion to determine the notification and how to send it out and what the content would involve. The timing of notification, once there's a determination made after becoming aware that there's a data breach, is a very tight window. If it's determined that you do have to notify supervisory authority, that has to be done without undue delay and where feasible, not later than 72 hours after becoming aware of the data breach. So that's why it's very important to have all of these measures in place ahead of time and to have an organizational understanding and training around these topics, because as you can imagine, it can be very serious very quickly depending on the nature of the incident, and people have to be able to move quickly to comply with the law. And with that, I think I'll move on to the next slide because, again, noting time, when can an entity process personal data? Again, there's a number of rules around that. There's two most common bases. One is with consent. The other is there's a legitimate interest. Most companies will rely on legitimate interest. It's very common. And legitimate interest provides the most flexible basis for a company to collect and process personal data. And generally, your public-facing privacy policy will be drafted in compliance with these regulations, making it very clear to the data subjects, what's the interest, why are you collecting it, who do you share it with, et cetera, et cetera. There are some basic questions that go with legitimate interest. For example, what is the purpose? What's the necessity? And what's the balancing, right? The individual interest versus the legitimate interest for the company to collect and process the data. Next slide. There's a number of privacy rights, and there's been litigation around this and challenges from individuals. I'm sure a lot of people are aware, say, for example, the case that recently came out with Google. Google and Facebook tend to be the two entities that we hear most of in this space. But here are the privacy rights that individuals have with respect to the internet. And the one that I want to touch on a little bit is this right to erasure, because this can impact companies, I think, practically speaking, where you're collecting data, you have a data subject that writes in saying, I want you to delete all of my personal data. But as you know, companies, we retain the ability to perform data analytics on the performance of our platforms to make sure that, it's performing correctly, or if we want to enhance performance. And we want to be able to retain the ability to use data on an aggregated basis for us to do that. So there's some case law that came out on this. And bottom line is the GDPR, in order to meet this right to erasure provision, you can retain some anonymized data, provided that the data subject's identity cannot be recovered from that remaining anonymized data. So there's sort of a balancing that took place that gave companies a little bit of flexibility to be able to retain anonymized data, provided that there's no risk of re-identification, so that you can perform some of these data analytics that is so key for companies in the analysis of the platforms. And then lastly, next slide, Privacy Shield. And I wanted to bring this up because many companies have gone through the steps of becoming Privacy Shield compliant, so that the transfer of data from the EU to the US, has been, there's no issue there. But the European Union Court of Justice invalidated the EU Privacy Shield in July of last year. It's called the Schrems decision. And as a result, companies are having to take another look at their data processing agreements and what's called the standard contractual clauses, which is a transfer mechanism between the EU and the US. So the standard contractual clauses have been recently updated. So if your legal teams have not already been doing this, I'm sure they're gearing up to do it, where we're having to go through these contracts and update standard contractual clauses and data protection agreements to be compliant now with this significant change in the law of invalidating the Privacy Shield. And the UK is expected to have its own version, GDPR, SCCs as well. So with that, I apologize, I kind of moved a little bit quickly, but I wanted to give Mr. Gomez a chance to speak as well. And so I'm sorry I kind of went over time. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gomez.
We have plenty of time, Sumi, don't worry. I will stop share and thank you again. It was awesome. It's so nice because I'm a journalist. So for me, like this privacy law is a new world and it's so nice, like learn a lot of you. So thank you again. And Mr. Gomez, very fancy. You can start your part if you want. I guess you can share your presentation, right? You're able to do it.
Yes, let me share my presentation so we can move forward. So thank you, Sami, for your amazing presentation from GDPR. Let me find my presentation here. Just 1 minute.
You got it? I can open here if you want.
Sure, if you could open there, it will be awesome for me because...
Don't worry, 1 minute. 1 minute, I'm trying to get the link. Here, I got it.
Thank you.
Where is here? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
I guess this one is in Portuguese because we have in Portuguese as well today. Now English. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Ju. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Kainan, and I'm the Data Privacy and Compliance Leader at Pipefi. I'm the responsible for the GDPR, LGPD, and all data privacy projects inside Pipefi. So next slide, please, Ju. My name is Kainan, but everybody from outside Brazil call me Mr. Gomez or Gomez because it's much more easier to pronounce. So that's it. Please go to the next slide. So let's go, community. The plans to be in compliance with the GDPR started with the creation of the action plan. The action plan determined which steps Pipefy had to follow to reach the compliance with the GDPR framework. So with the action plan, we can define which milestones we need to deliver to complete the project. Okay. After that, we entered in a sensitive part of the compliance project that was the data mapping process. We need to take a very granular vision of each process inside Pipefy to define and see which data, and when we start to discover all the processes, we can define the next step, okay? The next step on the plans to be compliant with the GDPR is the definition of the legal basis of the data processing, okay? On this step, community, we need to have much space to think about it, and the data, the legal basis definition is a thing that we need to perform because in the law, we do not have another way to be compliant, do not following the legal basis, okay? So we need to follow the best way the legal basis, because if we do not follow, maybe we will receive a few notifications and everything else related to the data processing inside Pipefy. Okay, so we can't leave the data uncategorized or generically, sorry, categorized. We need to comply with the law demands. Okay. After that, as Sumit told us, we need to create documentations and policies with all the requirements of the law, okay? We need to share these documentations with our customers and internally on Pipefy. We need to provide trainings and everything else relating the data processing inside Pipefy and how we take measures to leave all the data processing in compliance with the law, okay? After that, we need to check, and this process is very huge and long, the representatives and the DPO on each country that Pipefy has your operation, okay? We had a long time looking over all the countries that Pipefy has their operation and had customers there, because we need to follow the steps on the law, because every country in Europe has a few points in the law that they can change. So we need to check up which law is demanding for each country and see what the law demands that we need to do and perform there. Okay, so in the last part of the plan to be in compliance with the law and the GDPR is to notify all of you, our customers and honey badgers, that we are in compliance with the law. Okay, Ju, please, next slide. And what are the challenges in the implementation of the GDPR inside Pipefy? First, we need to execute this project in a record time. How can I explain that? We have an OKR inside Pipefy, and you need to follow this OKR to deliver the GDPR compliance, because our customers are requesting that, and the GDPR is a law that demands a lot of work. So we had only 6 months to deliver a compliance program to GDPR law. So the record time was amazing, and we are able to perform that, okay? The second challenge was to map each internal process inside Pipefy, because every time Pipefy is growing and every time new processes are being created inside the company. So the data mapping and the mapping of those processes and data handled inside Pipefy took a huge time to perform and to be in compliance with the law with this step. And this was a huge challenge that we got inside Pipefy. After that, we need to align with the teams the best way to handle their process, because the law demands that we handle the data from the European citizens with the best manners possible. So we need to align with all our honey badgers that how they will need to handle this process without impact or metrics. The fourth challenge is define the legal basis on each data handle. We can't define wrong legal basis for each data inside Pipefy. So we need to study every data process inside Pipefy to define a legal basis to that, okay? The fifth challenge was the checking on the local laws. As I mentioned before, in the European Union, each country has a place to change few points in the GDPR and data protection laws. So we need to check every law that Pipefy must be in compliance to deliver the best service for our customers. So this activity took a long time from our project because was a very huge process of researching and searching what we need to do to be in compliance. And the last step, but not the least, is the process to continue in compliance for the next years. And we need to solidify a continuous improvement process because the law changes, the data is much bigger every year that Pipefy is in a crescent manner. So we gather more data, we process more data, we can check inside Pipefy that our company is hiring United Europe citizens. So we need to check their information also inside Pipefy. So we need to continue in compliance with the law. So this step is very important for the next years inside Pipefy. Okay. So Ju, please, the next slide. And as I mentioned it before, the last but not the least, I would like to announce here for you, Pipefy community, that now Pipefy is a GDPR compliant company. So this is a surprise. Nobody knows this. We finished the process on Monday on this week. So it's a very fresh notice for all of you. And it was a pleasure working on this framework. And I how can I explain that to you? Was a very huge milestone for Pipefy to be in compliant with this law. And it's not a better place to tell you that is in the Meetup on the community. So that is a very huge news that I want to share. So I think that's it. Ju, we can go for the open mic session and questions, and it will be a pleasure to explain of all of you the process to be in compliance with the law.
Awesome, Kaina. Thanks a
Sorry
lot
for the
for
hush.
your.
It's my first time presenting, so maybe
Don't
I rush.
worry, you're amazing. It's amazing.
Sure.
Thanks a
Thank you.
lot.
Thank you.
And I'm feeling actually very posh because we are having this info before everyone. So Pipefy community, we are very special and posh. And I love the presentation. So thanks a lot for that. And of course, you can send us the questions. And I have actually one question for Sumi and another one for Kaina. So Sumi, I want to know, actually, I am being curious about your career. So in your career, have you ever faced like a really bad crisis in this matter? And what were your actions? And tell us about it if you have any experience, like you experienced any something like that.
Yes, well, you know, it certainly has in my career path. Unfortunately, I have experienced yeah, an incident where there was a compromised situation with personal data that was actually rather sensitive in nature, and it was. As you can imagine, you know, all hands on deck. So to Mr. Gomez's point, we wound up having to first thoroughly investigate, you know, what were the systems involved, who had access, you know, how was it that this information inadvertently, you know, was sent out in an unauthorized fashion, which took time. I mean, even with us all working on a priority basis, it probably took us easily, I would say, about 3-ish days to really come to an understanding of just what happened, what were the facts. And then from there, we needed about a day or two to review internally, as well as consult with outside counsel in that particular jurisdiction, as far as what were our legal obligations. And so, fortunately, in that instance, we were able to determine that there wasn't that high risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects, because the information, fortunately, had not made it outside of the company. It was more unauthorized internally within, but we still had to document our investigation, and we had to do a report of our findings and to substantiate the steps that we took in response. So definitely a very real issue that crossed my desk, and I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks. Awesome. And I have a few questions already here. So Sarah is asking you, Kaina, what is recommended for companies that work in multiple countries, like Pipefy, when these different countries have different privacy laws and rights? Should the company use different policies for the different clients, or develop one policy that will be compliant for all countries? Thanks, Sarah.
Yes, thanks, Sarah, for the question. This is amazing. Yes, we just did one policy that covers all the law, but we follow the UK data privacy law. So we explain to our customers that our office is in UK, so we follow the UK data privacy law. So if we need to make some changes or to apply something that the customer wants to, we have our DPA SCC that we share with our customers, and we can discuss there in this legal document that the measures that we need to follow different that our policy demands. So we just need to create one policy and move forward with this policy and share it with your customers. You don't need to create one for each country. It will be a mess if we need to perform that.
Yeah. And Brazilian law is also very, very trick, has a lot of
Yes.
details, right? And
Yes.
another question that we have here is from Clayton Rodriguez. Which step was the most challenging to achieve the compliance to the law, to GDPR?
GDPR. I think the data mapping step, because we need to stop all the company and check all the processes, all the data that we handle inside Pipefy, and perform our HOPA. HOPA is how can I explain to you? Is a huge data mapping document that we need to share with the data privacy team in each country. So the legal team in each country needs to check which data we handle inside Pipefy. So we need to gather all this information with our teams inside Pipefy. So this was the huge and I think the biggest step that we need to perform and transpass to be in compliance with the GDPR.
Do you agree, Sumi?
100%. Yeah, that is spot on, Mr. Gomez, because and a lot of times we might think that we've done the data mapping to the level that the law requires, but in fact, more often than not, probably falls short because the law is so stringent on this. So that resonates as being a very involved and probably the most difficult step.
And how it works in your company at Calm, because it's a company that is used by different people from different regions as well. So how is the strategy at Calm?
Well, it's, it kind of follows what I think to Mr. Gomez's point, right? You look at what is the highest standard of privacy law, and then you have your compliance to that highest standard. And so it's a philosophy that we take very seriously at Calm. Privacy and security is of utmost concern because we have millions of users around the world. And so, yes, absolutely. To kind of echo the point is we look at what is the highest standard, and then we map to that.
Nice.
Yes,
Glad
and another point that I want to highlight you, sorry for interrupting
No,
you.
no, please. Go ahead.
Nothing talking about the technology part of the compliance with the law, because we need to implement another security measures inside Pipefy to protect the data. This is a huge milestone that we need to follow, but I think the data mapping is the biggest point, because we need to talk with each team. We need to know what are the data they are processing, why are they are processing this data. So it's a huge process, talking with everybody inside Pipefy. So it was a huge process here inside Pipefy.
Yeah. And we have another question from Pablo. Thank you and congrats on that certification. So who should we connect at Pipefy to make sure that our internal process are also compliant? I understand this is mostly automatic for what we process through Pipefy, but that we may still need to take action internally.
Yes, you can contact me on privacy@pipefy.com. I can share with you our attestation letter for the GDPR. And if you need to contact us to answer anything that your customers are looking for, you can contact us for this compliance level. So we will share with the community, and all our customers are compliance with the GDPR. As I mentioned to you, this was a surprise that I leave here for you on this presentation, but you can contact me at the email privacy@pipefy.com. Then I can answer all your questions and provide the documentations that Pipefy has to be in compliance with the GDPR law.
Nice. And I have another question for both. So about like onboarding new employees, how the security team has to training them, because now we are all remote, like in Pipefy and Calm as well. So how we can make sure that the new employees are compliant as well with the privacy laws and they know the process, how it works in Pipefy, the training, and at Calm, for example. Sumi, please.
So in Pipefy, we have the annual training for the security team for all the employees. And basically, I am creating and sharing with you, all of you, inside our platform that we hired, call it One Trust, trainings about data privacy and about the local laws that the few things that has to follow. So for example, the engineering team needs to follow those steps to be in compliance on their process with the GDPR. The customer operations team needs to be in compliance with these steps. So for every and each team inside Pipefy, we had trainings that we share with them, and they need to complete this training and perform a test to provide us the confirmation that they know how to handle GDPR in personal data inside Pipefy. That's the way that we do inside Pipefy, Ju.
And pretty much the same. We have policies that we ensure that as new employees, depending on their role, their function, what sort of access they're going to have to what data. And then we also have, just across the company as well. So robust policies that we maintain and we share and we require trainings. Absolutely. So, and then just to what Mr. Gomez mentioned, it's an ongoing diligence, right? So every year ensuring that it's updated and people stay on top of it.
Nice.
Yes, and it was a good point you mentioned, Sumi, the robust policies. We need to have robust policies implemented inside the company, because if we suffer a data breach or everything else related for a honey badger or that shared personal data or everything else, we can talk with him. So you saw in the policy that you don't has to perform this data leak, what happened, and we can check what issue we have inside the company to get better in the next way. So good and robust policy is awesome to have inside the company also.
Yeah, and Honey Badger Sumi is a cute name that we have for Pipefy employees.
Yes, yes, sorry.
No,
Yes.
that's okay.
The employees, the Pipefy employees, sorry. It's so common to call everybody Honey Badger,
Yeah,
so
so every
yes.
time Honey Badgers,
Yes, yes, yes. Sorry.
and I was, oh my God, this Sumi is probably thinking that
What
we
Sumi's
are
thinking
working in a
about Honey
zoo.
Badgers? Mr. Gomes is
Yeah,
crazy.
but it's a cute name. It's a cute
That's a
name
wonderful,
for Pipefy employees.
wonderful name.
And do we have another questions? Yes, I can see. Guys, if you have another questions, just send on the chat or using the Q&A. But I believe this is it. Yeah, so just remember that the conversation doesn't need to end here. Community is the place for us to exchange knowledge and ask questions and always know a lot about Pipefy, best practices and everything. And I'm sending the link here on the chat so you can join us, join the Pipefy community, and you can share your questions there. And I'm sure that our team is going to be more than happy to reply to them. So thank you again. I'm super happy to have you here, Sumi and Kaina as well. It was a pleasure to learn a little bit more with you. And the doors are always open, Sumi. So if you want to come back, you probably will be more than welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Likewise, it's been a privilege and a pleasure. So thank you, Juliana and Mr. Gomez and Honey Badgers and the Pipefy community. Yes, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ju, for the inviting. Thank you, Sumi, for your words. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. And sorry for my bad English. I'm a little bit nervous, and it is my first time presenting in English. So
You did
thank you for
great.
everybody. Thank you, Sumi. Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you, community. Thank you, Honey Badgers. And if you need to contact me, as I mentioned that before, you can send me an email, and you can find me on the LinkedIn also, so you can contact me. Okay?
Absolutely.
It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so
And
much.
thanks, guys. See you next month, and
Thank you.
hope to see you in the community too. Bye bye. Have a great day.
Bye.